Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Hosting today's episode is Ali Naithani.
Welcome to the show. Let's get started by introducing our guest hosts. We have Tran Nguyen with us. Hi,
Nice
Tran.
to meet you.
Nice to see you. And we have Nadia Jordana. Hello, Nadia.
Hi, happy to be here.
All right. And Uma Janga.
Hi, Ali.
Hey, Uma.
It's great to be here.
All right. Well, I'm excited for another show. Today we are going to talk about something I think that we have talked about on our show before, and that is human rights. And in this complex world that we live in, a subject that I think we could use more education on and more discussion. So really looking forward to our conversation here. All right, so if we get started here, we've got Kristi Rudelius-Palmer with us. Hi, Kristi.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Thank you for being here. And you are at the University of Minnesota. You are the Human Rights Center co-director and the Humphrey Fellowship Program Director.
That is
right.
correct.
Well, let me ask Christy, tell us a little bit about the field of the human rights and some of the work that's done at the center and in the field generally.
Well, human rights is a wide field, and my area is really focused on human rights education. And I've been very fortunate to be, to have been involved in the Human Rights Center since its founding back in 1988. And so it's, over a quarter century old. But some of the work that we've done is really to try and build human rights constituencies, which means trying to have people really understand what human rights is, as well as then how you may be able to put it into practice. And so a lot of times it's translating human rights laws into real life practical purposes.
And Kristi, when we say the word, human rights, can you maybe, for some of our viewers who might be watching us right now, just give us a definition of what does that mean?
Well, oftentimes we say it means what everyone is born with. I try and usually start with its core values. So the core values that human rights embraces are issues around equality, around non-discrimination, human dignity, as well as responsibility and justice. And so I think when we talk about it, it's everything that we know that we have been born with, and yet oftentimes we know that human rights are violated. And so what we've been working on in the field of education for human rights is really to try and create cultures of human rights that really embrace everyone's individual identities as well as collective kind of communities that uphold those core principles.
When you say human rights, what are the typical kind of rights you are talking about? Can you mention that?
Well, oftentimes people tend to think of civil and political rights in the United States. So those issues around the right to vote or freedom of assembly or political participation. Civil rights and political rights are one component that are really in our U.S. Bill of Rights, which ended up being incorporated into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But it also includes economic, social, and cultural rights, which oftentimes, I think in the U.S., we tend to think of as privileges. Those rights might include the right to housing, the right to food, health care, education. And yet those are really core human rights that we all need to recognize, and we need to try and make sure that everyone is basically has those rights and have them realized.
So how do you educate those rights feel for those people, sir?
Well, we have been trying hard to do that, and I think we've done it through a few different programs over the years. One is really focused on mentoring and kind of building capacity of individuals to really, claim their human rights and work with others to try and empower them to know their rights. And those programs are really focused on our fellowship programs. So over the last 27 years, we've basically had over 600 human rights fellowships awarded to individuals to go work with human rights organizations around the world in over, I think, 100 countries, maybe even 120 now. And then they go and work with human rights organizations. And then they're learning and they're bringing what they've done in those field experiences back home to our communities. Another a fellowship program has been our International Humphrey Fellows program, which was actually started back in 1978 under President Carter to honor Hubert Humphrey for his work in international relations. And those are awarded to individuals to come here for basically 10 months, and they're mid-career professionals. And then they're able to share their expertise in the field of human rights and law, as well as then they can also learn, hopefully, from our community what we're trying to do as well.
Well, it sounds like a wonderful program, but how people find it? You know, if they wanted to know what is the human rights, where do we find these things and apply for ourselves if we don't know what it is?
Say, for example, healthcare. Example, how do you approach, you know, how if they want anything about healthcare related, because healthcare is widely important right now. So what do you do regarding that?
Okay, so I think there might be two different questions. So one is on the fellowship piece, then I think if right now, a lot of times there's students or volunteers that could apply for those human rights fellowships that we've awarded. If you're an international leader, you apply through your embassies to this Humphrey Fellowship program. But in terms of just starting at the very basics of, okay, let's say healthcare, some of the programs that we've had even begin at the youngest age level of even pre-K. So for example, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights approached us back in 2004 to help to develop, and we were able to do it, the only pre-K 12th grade curriculum on human rights education that exists in the United States. And in that, you begin with the very basic, like in the early stages of thinking about how do we create caring communities around, and you can link it to healthcare, around how do we basically grow to our full potential and make sure that we're caring for others, and if someone does not have proper health care, how can they get those access to supports for health care. And so at a very young age, I guess I was helped to pilot a curriculum that some educators did around the Convention on the Rights of the Child in, it was kind of a parent and early childhood setting. And so even those young 2-year-olds, and my daughter was in this pilot group, were able to learn what does a little 2-year-old that they were bathing, you know, or it was a plastic doll at that time, need to grow and develop. And so she was learning early on what those basic needs were. And then as parents, we were able to learn also, well, what does that mean in terms of advocating on behalf of our children so that they can continue to thrive as well. And so I think a part of it is basically some of the knowledge of human rights, that yes, healthcare is a human right. And being able to say that, and now we're starting to a little bit more, although there's continual challenges around it, but we know that basically people should be able to be born into this world and not dying at, either as mothers, they should have prenatal care. They should be able to have young children born, and we shouldn't have the highest infant mortality rate of any developed country. I mean, we need to figure out from the basic early stages how we can help so that everyone can thrive, I think, in their health care. But even higher education institutions, we have to embrace creating, I think, cultures of human rights and realizing the core purpose is for the well-being of our community. You know, how can we make sure that everyone is thriving?
And Christy, I often think, we hear in the news every day, well, there's this human rights violation, or there's this genocide going on there, or the sexual trafficking and all these, right? This so many issues in the world today. And so how do you, is you in the field of the education with this, is this something that, you're seeing, that the work is impacting positively? Can you give me a sense of, what the impact of the work? Because not to be so overly negative, but it feels like every time that news comes on, there's one more story. And it's
always.
Sometimes I wonder, when are we going to get a grasp on some of these things?
I agree. And you kind of reflect back, and you can be easily, I guess, get into that negative or the feeling of, I haven't made a difference. And so I do think one of the challenges of, and really the tools of human rights education is to try and provide that positive hope, or this notion of, you know, how can we be happy when there's so much to pull us down and have us get depressed. And so I think that it is a call for urgency and a call to try and keep moving things forward and realizing those small differences that we have made, but that we have to make more. And I guess to answer, like give you an example of something that's happened, I remember early on, we were working with teachers in the classroom, and one of the social workers was doing a human rights education class, and afterwards, you know, there was a fight on the playground, and she said, oh, I don't make a difference, you know, I think I'm gonna just even stop doing this. And one of her students came up, and she went to her and said, no, you know, human rights makes a difference. I had my brother's boyfriend, or my mother's boyfriend, was coming into my class, or my bedroom just the other day, and I said, no, this is against my human rights. Oh. And he left.
Good example.
And I guess, I mean, it's the small little pieces of being able to find the voice within when we know things are unjust. We know that we are human, and yet oftentimes, whether we're seeing ourselves in the media portrayed negatively, or whether we're being bullied on the playground, or whether we're, you know, these small acts, we have to find that voice within to say, yes, you are important.
That's a powerful example.
So that's where we have to
Right?
speak up, right? Whenever you see them wrong or something they're doing right, and we just speak it up and raise our voices to protect ourselves, right?
Yeah, but oftentimes I feel like we don't get that beautiful outcome of he left, right?
Even though we know inside, it's we have to tell that, but we won't.
We won't say it.
Many of these, you know, these victims of these kind of abuses, so to hear that story, so what it really translates to, though, to me is, you know, we've got to talk more about it, and you can affect change. You can affect change.
Well, and I would like to mention, like, something that's very recent that I went to just about a month ago, was something called Breaking the Silence. And Sarah Super, who has been working with us in human rights education for a number of years, unfortunately, she has come out, and she was raped by her boyfriend. And she ended up creating, with community members, something called Breaking the Silence, and it's a space that people who have not spoken up around sexual violence can come, and then allies can be there as well to listen and to offer kind of words in kind of bags behind the area to all of the victims who speak up. And I think it's a part of the fact that we've got to get away from shaming ourselves, or not, you know, not wanting to talk. And in a way, especially for our young people, we have to help them realize that no, we need to be able to speak in order to hopefully heal through these traumatic events.
So there's a right not to feel the shame, and that's something we don't even think about.
Exactly.
It just, that's there automatically. So that's a layer that I would have not thought of, but the right not to feel that shame, to be able to speak up about violations.
But then how do we train people like that?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you educate people like that?
Well, a couple of the things that we've done, and I'm not trying to say that we've done a lot, we've got to continue to do more. I would say there's a couple things we've done. Was back in 1992, we actually had a mock trial of Christopher Columbus in this state that ended up, you know, going viral and global. And Christopher Columbus was found guilty on 10 counts at our state capitol. But it was a part of recognizing that, wait, Columbus didn't discover America. The indigenous peoples discovered Columbus. And that we have to start relearning some of this history that we think about. For example, just even last year, when we were looking at 150-year history of the U.S.-Dakota conflict, and that finally we're recognizing that while Abraham Lincoln was able to ratify, get through the amendment to abolish slavery, at the same time he was also agreeing to have the largest mass execution of anyone, and 38 Dakota were hung in Mankato, Minnesota. And then that community was also brought up to Fort Snelling, and there was a concentration camp right here in Minnesota, and we're just beginning to really talk about it, because when I was a kid, I was going to Fort Snelling and only hearing one story. And so we have to continue to break down and relearn truths of what we think were truths by making sure that everyone's story's included.
And some of those things we don't want to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was another thing I was thinking about. Sometimes it's hard to go there with some of these topics, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes we can't accept that.
Yeah.
Oh, it might
Yeah.
not be true. Our mind won't accept that at that time.
But then I think, well, gosh, I get the choice, don't I? I get the choice to decide if I want to think about. I mean, when you read the paper, you have to. Of course, you have to balance your life and think of those things. But that's what really motivates me when I feel like, well, that victim didn't get the choice, and maybe I should take action and do something. You know, do you find that in your work that you know sometimes it's just really hard to deal with some of this?
It is, and we do have privileges, right? We
Yeah.
can sometimes we can decide to speak up or not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And before coming, I said, okay, what do you think to my son is the most important thing? He's a 15-year-old, and he goes, it's fitting in. You know, and this also the motivation of how are we going to get motivated to do something. And you understand that a part of it is all of us, you know, may want to fit in, and so we're not speaking up
Yes.
when we hear that terrible joke that, you know, with our family, or, you know, and we make decisions. And we have an activity that's called kind of the perpetrator, victim, bystander, intervener, healer, where we all play all of those roles. Sometimes we sit back and we don't. We're like, oh, do I really need to intervene? But we need to, and we need to teach our kids, you know, how
Yes.
they can make a difference. And if we're not teaching them those skills, you know, then unfortunately we're going to be seeing more and more of the continued violations that we don't want to.
So you work more with students, not you? Is that what it is?
I do work
Do they
with,
come to you all the time to bring all their human rights or
I actually,
question about things?
yes. And I've been very fortunate in my work to work not only with the young children, you know, and teachers, but also the students who are at the, you know, the formal schooling level, but then the international human rights leaders that are making a difference, whether they're coming from Yemen, you know, through a lot of the trauma, but they're working to try and protect children's rights or end child marriage, or whether they're working, you know, in Pakistan as police officers to try and end, you know, violations that are going on in their communities against women or children or other individuals. I mean, I think it is a full community, and we are the community. And I am very interested. Here's my call to action of having everyone go up and take a look at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. I just got back last weekend, and they've done an amazing job of creating this museum that you can kind of look at both the local issues, but bring it to a national level and a global level. Love to bring something like that here to Minnesota, and I think we need to have it. And we need to think about then, how do you teach advocacy, you know, through this notion of a learning laboratory? You know, how can we be the change agents so we can basically help others and help ourselves to speak up?
What a great idea.
Yep, that's a
Wonderful
great
idea.
idea.
Well, I want to congratulate you. As I understand, you were the
Exactly.
2015 O'Brien Award Human Rights winner. So congratulations.
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 Well, it takes a village. I know that's an old African proverb,
did
but
it.
it's a community. We all need to keep standing up.
Trust me, not everybody can do it. So you should
That's
feel
right.
proud of that. Yeah.
Well, Christy, if someone wanted more information about the work that you do you have a website you could direct them to?
Yes, you can go to a couple of different websites if you're interested. One, you can check out the Human Rights Center at the University of Minnesota. And then there's a Human Rights Library, which is available in 10 different languages that we've produced. We get more than 3 million users, so just plug in University of Minnesota Human Rights Library, and there's lots of tools.
Wow.
Good to
Powerful
know.
impact.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to keep talking, but we're going to shift the conversation a little bit. What I've got here is I have a surprise question. I have no idea what's in this envelope, but this was provided to us by our director, Mike Rosberg. And what I'm going to do is read what the question is, and then we'll have a little discussion about it. Okay? So let's see what we have. All right. True or false? Men make war, women make peace.
Ooh, fun one. Fun one. I don't know if it's as black
Heal through these traumatic events.
and white as that.
We go opposite.
I think in general, I suppose that statement has been made. I have a husband who's probably more of a peacemaker than a war maker.
Opposite.
But what do you guys say?
It all depends, every person is different. So
Yeah.
I have seen men who would like to be like have peace mentality, have peaceful mentality. Some people like, oh, we have to fight for that right. So it all depends on the personality, but I cannot totally agree with this.
Yeah, I would say no. I think that women, we are the ones who birth those children, and that those children are our children, and they're girls, boys, sometimes asexual entities, and may not choose even one sexual identity. And I think that we need to realize that it's across genders. I think that we need to figure out what can we do? How can we basically stop the violence? Because we know it's being perpetuated time and time again, and our children are unfortunately abused, and then unfortunately often if they can't break the cycles of violence, it's continuing.
Yeah.
You don't stop them, yep.
And it probably goes back to education more than anything, whether it's male or female, making war or being a peacemaker. It probably boils down to early education would help an awful lot.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I would definitely say false. I think to find peace in the world, I think that it's not about further dividing us or further branding us or further, wherever we are in the world today, I think it's about trying to work together. And I have to think.
I go back to the human rights. People have to learn to do things. What's right, what's wrong, what female can do, what male can do. It peace and war. It's equally bring up the human rights.
Right, right. I think to get to some of the goals of, I believe, what would be with human rights in a peaceful world, I think it's about how can we work together. And I'm the mother of 2 boys, and so when I hear statements like this, it doesn't sit well with me, because it further divides men into something that I don't think the women's movement is necessarily, it needs to be about a negative attitude towards men. I think it's about, again, how do we find those common denominators? How do we move ahead as women in positive ways that make the world shine?
And in respectful ways.
In respectful ways, And
I think that oftentimes it starts as soon as those fights on the playground or even in our homes, like, okay, are we going to reinforce some of those identity issues? Oh, well, girl, you're acting like a girl. Oh, you're crying like a girl. Or are we going to try and say, wait a minute, let's restore. Okay, so we've got the fight. That doesn't, on the playground. Are we going to tell our kids, okay, you go fight back? Or are we going to look at restorative justice practices that we're starting to learn about and realize, wait a minute, there's alternatives, and oftentimes the people that are fighting each other are the ones that may be the most, feeling a lot of hurt and trauma from,
most damage to begin with. How do you diffuse the situation?
This can be right when it comes to physical way, though. People of olden days, men used to make more war. They used to go for battles.
Usually men do that.
Physical sense, if you take that from that point of view, the statement can make a thing, but as far as practical sense, I don't
That's
think
probably where it grew out of, throughout history.
I think we're also a society, though, that was set up on that men, because some women didn't even qualify in the U.S. military to be able to go and fight the war. So I think it was a societal setup that also would contribute to that.
Well, and the violence against women, jumping back to violence against women and children, I think we know that, and trafficking in persons. I mean, there are issues that we know have been very much the perpetrator on the male side of things.
Like
so we
stabbing people, those kind of criminal things, typically you can say 90% would be that side.
That's where it's, that's where it springs from.
Yeah, exactly. Those things, like that's why only one or few categories we can take, but not like, if you generalize it, it doesn't, I don't think we can generalize that. That's what I'm telling.
Well, and the question is, how can we, I've been able to go to something called the John School, where they're trying to teach men who have basically been buying women or in these fields that it's not okay. And I've been surprised at how oftentimes, for the first time, they're like, what? You know, well, it's a choice.
Exactly.
And oftentimes we perpetuate some of those same stereotypes of like, oh, well, you know, they're choices. But we don't go back to those roots of what we're doing, you know, at the very basic level of, okay, are we telling our men like they're being treated like a girl, like there's something less than, versus embracing kind of those positive characteristics that they can be at a young age, and that being a peacemaker may be a positive thing and not a negative.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So back to your point about, I think that, you know, the early education and just affecting children, which can have a lifetime, right, of positive outcomes and how they behave, and it starts in the classroom, I presume, and
in our homes,
in our
and
homes,
in our
definitely.
places of worship, or you know,
Places,
communities, on the streets, neighborhoods, playgrounds.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you
and,
very much for having me.
Oh, thank you.
And your continuous work on human rights. You're changing the world, making it a better place. So we
Well,
thank you
I
for
am
that.
so fortunate to have amazing leaders and mentors and folks in the field that are doing this, and that we're all trying to make a difference.
Yeah, and anyone can do it, right? With your example story you gave, wow, how powerful. One teacher made no difference in that child's life, didn't she?
She did.
Yeah, all right.
Learn
Well,
from
thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
My
All right.
pleasure.
And we thank you for being with us today on It's a Woman's World, and we hope to see you next time.
I'm happy to announce to viewers of this show that a new program called Women of the World will debut on Metro Cable Network at 10:30 a.m. on Friday, April 1st. The mission of this new show will be to give voice to women from around the world who have chosen to make the United States their home. Hosts for the new show will include Amalia Moreno-Damgard. Originally from Guatemala, Amalia is an author, chef, and bilingual Latin food and culture consultant. Fadia Thabit. Originally from Yemen, Fadia is a human rights activist and a Humphrey Fellow at the University of Minnesota Human Rights Center. Melissa Nembangi from Cameroon is the award-winning director of the Minnesota African Women's Association. Tran Nguyen from Vietnam has written 2 books of poetry in her native language and currently works in health services. And Uma Janga, who moved to the United States from India, is a talented singer who performs at a variety of events with the group Raga Lahari. Topics for the show will be many and varied, including cultural customs and values, the pluses and minuses of living in the United States, world affairs, and values that are common to all humanity. Please join us all on Friday, April 1st at 10:30 a.m. for Women of the World.